Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm LaShawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching.
All right, so today we are going to explore the topic of asking for help. And this has come up because we have a tendency, especially women and mothers have a tendency to think, oh, we should just do it all ourselves, or we might struggle with how to ask for help or what specifically we need help with. Sometimes if we ask for help, it makes it worse than if we hadn't asked for help. That sometimes happens. Or, just feeling like, oh, I can do this and just not wanting to give up. Speaking personally, I am facing a challenge with my daughter who has developed what is called psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, where she just freezes for hours on end. And being able to recognize your limits and ask for help. So that's what we are going to be focusing on. Asking for help is something that really relevant to the holidays as well. Sometimes we might put unrealistic expectations on ourselves in terms of entertaining for the holidays or, getting the perfect gift or all of those things that we can put pressure on ourselves about. And asking for help is often sometimes something that we can struggle with around this time of year with the holidays and with so many things that we're juggling at once. So Eryn, what comes to mind for you when we look at this topic of asking for help?
So I have, I think, 3 different ways my mind went. First, with your daughter, that is a lot to hold and sometimes really hard to know what type of help to ask for, when you can get in to see certain type of help. So that's a lot, and I'm sorry you're holding all of that too. On a lighter note, asking for help right before, our weekend was slammed. My 10-year-old had her sleepover for her birthday party where we had 9-year-old and 10-year-olds yesterday to this morning. Whoa, let's just say, yeah. But anyway, we had that, and then I direct our church play, and which was today. Not the play itself, the play's next week, but oh man, definitely needing to ask for help there as this stuff tries to come together. And so right before I sat down to record this podcast with you, LaShawn, I had like a moment to sit down and watch a little bit of TV. So I turned on that new Christmas movie on, I think it's on Amazon or on Prime, and it's Oh What Fun. But I haven't seen the previews. I just kind of started watching it, and I'm not very far into it. But what you see is a mom with kind of young adult children, probably in their 20s-ish, and they come home for the holidays. And you see how even her own inability to ask for help starts playing out in this very comical yet serious take on, the relationships around this time of year, and a lot of the work that is held by the female figures in those relationships this time of year. So anyway, it's so interesting because I didn't know this was our topic, and that is what I literally watched for the last maybe 20 minutes. So not quite sure where this show is going, but I'm curious to watch it some more. So that, and then just on the third piece is, this really reminds me of going back to our episode that launched last week, and how prioritization can be really helpful, and that reflection and taking time to reflect specifically on looking ahead with this episode on asking for help and where do we need help, and having time to sit with that. So I think that is another layer here is, with your situation with your daughter and just the busyness of the season, I'm wondering, are there good coaching questions for each other to help us find the right help? Because asking for help is nuanced, right? It's not only how do you ask, what do you need, what do you ask, how do you prioritize when you need help in many ways. So I just kind of started thinking about it in those 3 ways as you were talking, and not sure if I have any direction at this point, but find it a very important topic this time of year.
Absolutely. And to speak to your question about coaching questions, one thing that came to mind is asking the question of what can you do in situations where you're faced with challenges, or you've got a lot of things that you have to accomplish in a certain amount of time, like going to the sleepover that you had, and just, asking what you can do or what is with what you have the bandwidth for. I think we talked about that too with prioritizing as well, just being aware of what you are capable of doing, and what you have space for, and then what you don't have space for, and then having, and that's where the prioritizing comes in, is the things that are important to you and the things that you can do, and then you can then move to where you can delegate some things, like how can I delegate some tasks, or what kind of support would I need to complete this task, or to meet the needs of, in my case, like my daughter, like what support can I use, or can I have that's going to help me in this, to be able to give her what she needs as well. So especially with something that's recent and also so outside of my own experience, not really knowing or having the tools, and not even knowing where to look, or where to begin, that kind of thing. So I think just being able to assess what you can do, and then also asking what support would help, like what are some resources that are available. So going back to my own situation with my daughter, the school nurse reached out to us and sent us email and gave us some contacts for her specific condition, and was able to contact an expert in this condition that she has, and able to find a therapist who can work with her. So this all came from, the school nurse reaching out, giving us resources, taking the time to look at those resources, and reaching out and asking for help. And then that kind of goes back to the support, like what support is needed for this. Sometimes you get unsolicited advice when you have a situation, especially with children. Some people, especially grandparents, feel a need to like interject and say things like, oh, well, you should XYZ. But really, most people they need to have the time to process the information, the new information, and also just the feeling of helplessness is really part of that too. And being able to give yourself permission to not know all the answers. And that's difficult. As a mother, I feel like I should have all the answers. I should have all the resources. I should be doing everything right. And when things aren't going according to plan, or they're not going fast enough, and then you talk to someone and they give you all this unsolicited advice, then I end up feeling really just defeated and like, oh, like a failure. So I think there is a tendency to put a lot on our shoulders that is unnecessary. So even just sitting down and just being honest, like what can I do and what resources can I use, or in order to learn more or get more information. Any thoughts coming up for you, Eryn?
Yeah, as you were talking, I could see kind of some of the emotional layers unlayering, and also the kind of relief to have the space to even just clear that in a way, to be able then to say that, what are the resources I truly need, and how do I get there? And I think that, at least in my experience in working with individuals, I see that happen. And even in my group settings as well, when I'm facilitating groups, I see that where people often do need like some time to, like you mentioned, some time to sit and process aloud feelings and all the layers, to at least move that out of the system, to move into this next layer of, okay, now what do I do? And some of us take a lot longer with that, and some people maybe don't need as long of a runway with that. But I want to honor the time that takes either way. It does take time, like you noted. And so how does that fit in when you're already kind of slammed schedule wise? And I know this goes to prioritization, and that is a big Achilles heel for me. So that's not not something I do well, but providing the space for time in a coaching context can be really helpful for people to unlayer what's going on before you get into the problem solving. And that's a classic coaching model. When you are coaching an individual, you go from exploration and kind of all over the place. It's very iterative. Then to the second half of the appointment that leads into like the last quarter where you're really starting to kind of narrow in on next steps, whether those are strategies or simply next steps or things like that. And so this is, I think, a really good example of how asking for help is a perfect topic to bring to a coaching appointment and just say, I've noticed that this topic has been coming up for me and let's explore it together. And I think there's so much there and so much richness that can come from that. And then on the other end, in your situation, I love that you've highlighted the process of, okay, the school nurse contacted us and the school nurse knows an expert in this area and has that therapist lined up for your daughter. And I think that that is a gift. I think that in a lot of places that may not be happening in schools. So, just thinking too, if that's not the case, what are some coaching questions you can ask of your schools or of your school nurses to have them help you? Because sometimes you have to ask those questions of the professionals for them to be able to help you. You want them to just think of it on their own. And unfortunately, that's not not always the case for so many reasons. We're all human, being one of them. But I think that that's another piece here too, is sometimes we have to ask some of the professionals to the questions so that they can help us as well. And then in this process too, so you have the nurse, now you have the therapist. It's like, what other help or support do you need in this case with your daughter? I guess I'll bounce that question back to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, one thing that comes to mind is just knowing other parents who have dealt with this because it's so different. I mean, it's not like epileptic seizures where people recognize that and they can conceptualize that because, that's something I think that we learn about, we know about, and there's like protocol for that. But for these non-epileptic seizures that she has where she just is unable to speak or she's unable to move. And so just knowing like what other parents are thinking, like if is there like a support group for parents with teens with this condition, and that would be like a next step for me probably when we meet with the therapist this week. We'll be doing a consultation, and this has been like a really slow process. Like it happened maybe a month and a half ago, and we've just been kind of fumbling in the dark trying to figure out what to do. And just now started getting some results in terms of like getting an appointment with the neurologist, which took forever and isn't going to happen until the end of next month. And then we have now we've gotten in touch with this therapist. So I feel like things are starting to move in the right direction. But it would be really great to hear from other parents who have teens. Apparently, this condition, according to the school nurse, is increasing. Like incidence of this condition among teen girls. Actually, I think it is. There's more report of this, and that's really interesting to me as well. Because, prior to this, I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know that it was even a thing. And then come to find out that it actually is. And there's like a whole community dedicated to epilepsy, but now non-epileptic seizures is what they call it. But when we've gone to the ER, they've said that it's like non-functional, something kind of a functional thing, and not having to do with some misfiring in the brain, which is like epileptic seizures, has more to do with like the physiological, and this is more psychological. So it's just different. And then also wanting to support my daughter as well. So just finding resources that I can learn more about this and understand this more so that when she does experience an episode, I can be there and support her and help her as much as I can, which is something that requires more knowledge and more research. And it would be great just to be able to know if there's like a group of parents and what are they thinking and how are they approaching it. So that's the next thing for me in terms of like support and just knowing that I'm not alone, that this is not a thing that I have to carry on my own and my husband doesn't have to carry it. So that's kind of where I'm at with this.
Yeah. The finding support group piece makes a lot of sense, especially for a diagnosis like this where you may not know many people who have this. And so even that, like taking the time to find that and get resourced in that area, this might lead to, again, going back to last week's conversation, how you can prioritize your time so that you don't burn out as you add in more of this to your already full schedule. So it's kind of like I see like this full schedule and then this situation and it's coming to a head and it's like gonna all overflow like a volcano. I guess the listeners cannot see my arms, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
there's like,
Yeah.
your full schedule at the top and then all this stuff else is bubbling up and coming up and coming up. And then it all just starts to be like way too much.
Yeah.
As it starts to bubble up, are there ways to bring this a little lower? Can people help with more of your administrative duties at work? Can people help with your other child in certain ways? Just trying to maybe have a plan with that too is what makes me think of coaching, right, in general, and how we can make things more fluid for our clients, but also more reasonable. So it's not that feeling of just overload. So I think that coaching here too could be a really important support because it would allow for brainstorming with a thought partner. So LaShawn has just noticed that she needs support groups. Okay, what else do you need to lighten your workload? And so we would just bounce these questions back and forth. And maybe we do that right now, give you a little short mini session on coaching to kind of distill down how you can have a plan for help, for the help that you want and need.
Yeah. That's a good question. I do like how you mentioned the idea of like delegating other tasks, not just related to this, but also related to like the work I do. And one thing that I'll say is that my work is flexible enough that I can shift things around a little bit. So on top of this new development with my daughter, we had like car trouble last week, and I was really grateful for the fact that I had a job that allowed me to shift my schedule around and be flexible. So I think one of the first things that I would need to do is ask for help in terms of like some of the jobs that I do that other people can do, setting them up with the tools they need in order to do it, show them what I do, like give them a template or something, or give them something where they can take over that task so that I can use that time that opens up for maybe doing some research on finding support groups. And I'm hoping to get that information from this therapist when we do the consultation. Or also, I have like a caseworker with other healthcare providers that we work with my daughter. So I can reach out to them as well. But like being able to delegate these like kind of clerical things like writing thank you letters to donors and stuff like that, I can just set that up with, someone at the center who can do it. And I know that the time that they have the time to do it, I'm not piling on things on their plate. So yeah, that's a really good question. And I think bringing back the value of working with a coach, often when we keep these things inside of ourselves and we're just kind of processing it on our own, when we're able to process outside and talk to someone, like Eryn, when you were talking about the image of the volcano and the idea of like mitigating those circumstances, like where if things were to continue in this trajectory where we have all these different things coming up, if just having the time to just look at how we can prevent that from erupting. And the idea of like the image of the volcano is another thing where there's a sense that sometimes you can like release the pressure, or you can make it so that it's not such a big explosion, or things like that you can do to prevent that. And then there's the idea of the pressure, like where can you relieve certain points of pressure so that it doesn't all just come to a head. So I think just having the experience of talking to you and processing it out loud and hearing it out loud is helpful because it gives me a clearer picture of what needs to be done, what I can do, and it also gives me a sense of, again, this is coming up a lot for me, just personally, just like not feeling alone and feeling like I'm not carrying this by myself. So that's what's coming up for me right now. Um, and I wonder about, to Eryn, like you are in the grief and loss space, and where does asking for help come up when you're working with your clients?
Yes, it comes up in so many ways in this space. And that's where I use my Bloom Path framework to help people see where they want to prioritize, where they may be needing the most help, how they ask for that, what they can do. Because as a reminder, with that framework, it looks at 6 internal touch points and 7 external touch points that grief has with and within someone. And it allows them to then be aware of how they all relate and how they're intertwined, which may be impacting their well-being in different ways beyond, you know, the the loss itself. And then on top of that, it allows clients to say, okay, I feel like I need to prioritize my physical health, or I need to prioritize my cognitive and emotional health, or I need to prioritize my creativity and my relationships, or my family and my social network, whatever, it's very different depending on the person. So that's one thing that I use and I see all the time, because in grief, a lot of people know they need help, but they don't know what they need or want. And they're very frustrated with their networks and their close relationships because those people are not providing what they need. And that's really a challenge, because in grief and loss, we need to be able to say what we need. And it makes that whole process of saying what we need or asking for help so challenging, because our world has just been completely shifted, and so we are changing. And so what we would have needed in the past, we may not need right now, or not even, or we may need something completely different, or it may be the same and just a little bit different. So I think that's why this framework is so invaluable to people going through grief and loss, because it does help with that by giving not only the framework, but also then delving into the actual tools and skills the griever may want and need to be able to ask for help. And I talk about that in my book, Blooming Through Loss, Tending to Grief with the Bloom Path. And I share, I think, in one part of the book where it's like, one woman or one individual wanted help with their laundry, another wanted help with their cooking. Both of them were like, I definitely don't want you to touch my laundry. I definitely don't want you to touch my cooking. But yet we often want to just do these things that we think are going to be helpful to the griever without asking them. So I think that's another layer for the people supporting the griever. They need to know how to ask for help, and they need to know how to be vulnerable to sit with the griever in that space and really reach them with what they truly need and want, rather than their own agenda, right? So it's almost, yes, the griever needs support and help, and needs maybe help asking for help, but oftentimes it's the people within the circle, within the griever circle and social network, that may need help. Not only how do they ask for help on how to better help the griever themselves, but also how do they help a griever and also take care of their own health. So there's so many layers, and I know there's way more when it comes to grief and loss when we think about how that relates to asking for help. But it shows up in so many ways and so many different conversations in any type of loss that I have worked with. Just this year, it's been spousal loss, it's been divorce, it's been child loss, it's been pregnancy loss, all over the map, but they're all kind of in this same space of this help question, I think, in very different ways. But I like that you posed that, LaShawn, because it comes up all the time in the grief space. And I get kind of a little bit defensive sometimes when people always want like a straight answer. What do you do when someone's grieving? Or what do you say? And I just want to, I guess it's a bit of a call to action and a little bit of an aside here, is I always go back to, how do you show up authentically in a caring way? And how do you ask them what they truly want and need without overwhelming them? That's it, right? Like do those things, and I think things will be okay. So yes, asking for help in the grief and loss space is a big question that comes up across the spectrum of loss and the different roles that people play. On I want to shift gears here because I wouldn't be authentic, I guess, without sharing and disclosing that, when I was working as an administrator at CU Boulder in my and during the pandemic, um, very high workload, infant daughter, breastfeed, like all the stuff, just completely overwhelmed. And as I listen to this conversation, I'm sitting here trying to think back to myself in that space. And even with these skills or even with these suggestions of coaching, would I have accessed it? Would I have even taken I didn't have the time I felt like to even I was already beyond the volcano. I was already at the overwhelm, right? Um, so I'm just curious, LaShawn, with your coaching background too, like in those cases, right, where it feels like, okay, I can't even ask for help because I'm beyond being able to do that. What can we do to
Mhm.
help those people? Yeah, so that's coming up too.
Such a good question. Similar to what you said about people who want a straight answer when they ask that question, I would say, as with anything, when we're in a coaching relationship, we want to meet the person where they are. And if they're not in a position in that moment where they are ready to ask for help, it might just be really being curious about where they are and then with them exploring what they need in that moment, whether it's to just take a moment of silence, a stillness, or if it's to, focus on one thing that's really coming up in their in their mind in during the coaching session. But I think it goes back to what you said about having an agenda. Like if you are there for a loved one who's grieving, or if you're there for someone who is dealing with a situation that they've never dealt with and they're feeling overwhelmed, or they're feeling like they want to do something but they don't know what to do. Sometimes the best thing we can do, and this kind of goes back to what I'm needing, and this is like more of a personal thing, but and also from my own experience as a coach and also just a human being, is how important it is and how valuable it is to be seen and heard and to have someone sit with you
Hmm.
in whatever you're going through, wherever you are. I don't have an agenda. I'm just going to be here with you and we'll see what emerges. And it doesn't have to be something big, it doesn't have to be anything at all. It could just be hugging you, or it could just be sitting with you, or it could be, doing something else like that will bring some peace and relief to you. But I'm going to let you lead, and I'm just going to sit here and know that I'm here and I'm going to meet you where you are. And I'm going to hold space for you. And I think that's what holding space is. I mean, people outside of the coaching and the self-development and the healing practitioners circle will look at us and be like, what do you mean by holding space? And I think what that means is being there and not filling that space with your own agenda, your own desire to relieve your discomfort because you don't have all the answers. And there are people who want to fix things, and there are people who want to like give unsolicited advice before they even understand the situation. It's like they come at it like, I see you're upset, I see there's things that are happening that need to be fixed and I have all the answers, but they're not really listening to the person. They don't see the person, they see the situation, or they see what they think they know, or maybe they even see something similar to what they went through, and so they project onto that person's situation their situation. There may be some similarities, but they're never identical, and it's we see things differently, we approach things differently, and I think this kind of goes back to our previous conversation about prioritization and that need to just pause and take a beat and let things just be and not try to fix them. Because I think when you, in the face of grief and in the face of overwhelm and in the face of things that we don't understand, I think it's just human nature to want to make sense of it and to control it and make it do what you want it to do, you know. But I think the most important thing is for us as human beings just to be there with the person. And so to go back to your original question, I think it's just a matter of rather than approaching a situation with someone who appears you observe needs help or needs something, it's probably better just to you see where they're at and then kind of go on that journey with them. And they might get to that part where they're like, so how do I ask for help? And that's when you explore and you brainstorm different ways to ask for help, but it has to come from the person. What are your thoughts, Eryn?
I love how you articulated that whole segment, especially right at the beginning, and the way that you talked about holding space and relayed that as a way to care for people, whether you are a coach or a caretaker or a friend or a neighbor, right? Like it all applies in kind of a similar foundational model here. And so it kind of takes me back to the beginning where you were talking about like where we kind of circled in on having the space to be able to show up and be seen and say aloud what you need to say aloud, to then maybe take a breath to, okay, now how can we move forward? And I see by the way that, you talked about holding space, that is an example of how to do that, right? How you allow whatever emerges in the conversation for that person to show up for them, and then let that kind of take the lead from there as you work in a coaching relationship. I see so much beauty in that. And I see that would have been so incredibly helpful. What was that, like 7 years? How long ago was the pandemic now? Feels like it's been never ending, to be honest, even though like, yeah, yeah. A
Yeah,
lot of unprocessed grief with the pandemic, like so much. But,
for sure.
yeah, but just like, knowing that you're held in that gentle way, I think is a gift that humans can give each other. And when you're held in that way and you know what that feels like, you then know how to give it as well. And I think that is something else. A lot of people haven't had that level of care. I mean, so many people, I would say, right? And some people, yes, will automatically just know what that is, and they automatically share that with the world in a very kind and beautiful way. But I think sometimes you have to be the receiver of that support to be able to help others as well. So, who knows what comes of the situation, LaShawn, with your daughter and your supports that you're receiving, and how that may grow into something else as well. So yeah, I kind of, that's where I was headed with that. I kind of, the beginning was not very clear with how I was saying that, but here we are. Now we're here.
No, it's clear.
At this space. And I think that that's the mystery of everything unfolding. And I loved what you said about controlling. We want to be able to control every aspect. And I will say, I think some people are really good at controlling things and somehow can manifest things in a very controlled way. And I don't know how that works. But to be able to acquiesce to a situation, I think it helps us to be open to support, to be open to ideas, and maybe what we let in through all of that is so much more than if we simply want to control the situation ourselves. So I know as a parent, it's really hard with a child to, I mean, right, you want to control, you want everything to be okay for them, right? You want that control. So I'm wondering too, is there some level with asking for help where people can learn new strategies and tools to still have some control, but also learn tools to give some of that away or to acquiesce to the situation so that so it's a little more, I always use this word, buoyancy. So there's a little more buoyancy in the situation. So yeah, that's that's where I'm at.
Well, I think buoyancy is a really good word, that ability to, and there's some resilience in that too, to be able to adapt to situations and then also to go through that process that is part of change. and then, and grief and loss, mental and physical conditions shifting and changing, and the conundrum of psychological condition that manifests physically is really just being buoyant and being able to kind of sit with the uncertainty of the situation, as you mentioned what you were saying about just what unfolds in a situation. And there are people who can really take command and make something like into a vision, or make a situation seem like effortless or whatever. But and I appreciate that, but I also think that it's really important not to hold ourselves to high standards that can add more pressure and add more stress than is necessary. And I think that would be also going back to your Bloom Path method, and being able to clarify and articulate what it is that is being affected by the loss, and what's showing up in your grief, to be able to see that, and to be able to then construct a map, a new map to navigate that situation. And again, it goes back to resilience, buoyancy, and orientation, and acclimating and adapting to things that are shifting and changing in ways that can be very profound, and in other ways that may be transient, and may just kind of be flowing through your life, but not making a permanent impact on your life. But in the moment, it does feel very permanent, and it feels like it's going to be there for a while. And so there's a lot of like different aspects of what you're going through in terms of like changes and things like that that require patience and grace. And the one thing that comes up for me is just where other people fit in that journey or that process that you're going through. And I think what we can do as friends, as coaches, as healthcare providers, is really just listen to the person and give them that gift of feeling heard, and walk with them and really get curious about what they're experiencing before diagnosing or deciding, oh, this is what needs to be done. But just really taking the time to listen. I know that when I'm in situations where I'm dealing with a healthcare provider, or I'm interacting with a concerned loved one, the ones that really listen, who ask questions, who are curious about what's going on before they jump in with a bunch of advice, those are the ones that, those are the kinds of conversations that I leave feeling empowered and encouraged. Conversations with people who have a lot of unsolicited advice and they're well-meaning, I just leave those conversations feeling drained and defeated and overwhelmed. So that's my own personal experience. What are your thoughts, Eryn?
I align with you with asking questions and holding space what in the way that you listen. For me, that's a much more effective approach than simply giving advice. I think that would be the case for a lot of people. Now, I'm sure there are people who are like, just tell me what to do, and that works for me. And I think that even just to go there a little bit in coaching, if a client comes in and is like, I need advice, tell me what to do, let's go there. Well, to be able to give advice, you still have to ask questions, right?
Right.
Or else advice isn't going to be valid, or things like that. So, I think, when you enter into a coaching relationship, it's good to have a coach who is going to be a companion that asks questions and holds space in the way that they listen and the way they stay curious to help you draw out what you want and need the most. And I think I brought this up last week about like future visioning being helpful. And for some reason, that just keeps coming up more and more lately for me, just as a tool, to do some future visioning exercises to understand like what the best outcomes would be, to then be able to back map like how to get there. I think that can be just one, simple coaching tool. Although, the way you do the future visioning exercise isn't simple, but doing that in a coaching session, I think could be really helpful for people who are needing that support about asking for help. And often we don't know how to ask for help because we're not taught how to ask for help. So, like, even in the movie that I mentioned, you know, she's dropping hints very passively, but also like it's clear what type of help she's asking for. And as growing up, it's, you're never lauded for asking for help, really. You are more, oh, you got the right answer, you did it yourself, good job. Like that's the framing. No, I know that's shifted some, and as years have gone by. But still, I think that this concept needs to be taught more explicitly. And whether that's with parents and or families and children, or whether that's within schools or church communities, wherever it is, kind of reducing some of the shame around asking for help, I think is important as part of just the actual skills around how to ask for help. How to be direct, how to know what you need. And it goes back to where we've been this entire conversation for this podcast. Well, to know what we need to dig in and have these curious conversations. And so, yeah, all of those things, take time in terms of how we teach them. But I think they can be helpful tools for our youth. And just to add to that, for student development theory in college, students are moving into that phase where they should be learning how to ask for help in effective and appropriate ways. And again, it's in all the literature about how young adults and students at that age should be developing emotionally, physically, socially, etc. But it's not taught, right? So, and it doesn't have to be so explicit all the time, but I think there is a level of asking for help, instruction would be wonderful. So I just want to say I threw that in there at the end because I value this topic so much, and I would like people to feel so much less shame and embarrassment when it comes to asking for help. So I wanted to make sure that was part of the conversation as well. And I think that's all I have today. I think that's where
Yeah,
I'm at.
I love that you brought that up, the shame that's related to asking for help. I think I see that a lot with men, actually. Um, Going back to the whole car situation, one of the reasons why our car didn't get fixed quicker is because my husband was just so proud about like asking for help. Like he did not want to ask for help. He's like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get this done, And so there's that fine line between, um, supporting a person and being like, I believe in you. I know you can do this. And that, wanting to get things done in a timely manner because this is all, causing things to be really disrupted. It's really disrupting our routine. So yeah, that shame is that's a piece in itself that we could probably take an entire episode to talk about, the shame around asking for help. But definitely, we are in that part of the episode where we introduce coaching nuggets of wisdom. And one thing that continues to come up for me is the need to take the time and give yourself permission and time to assess your situation and get curious about what is your situation, and what are some of the factors that are affecting the situation? And that includes the environment, the physical environment, your beliefs around it, and the people that you're interacting with, if at all. So that's my coaching negative wisdom. Take the time and the space, if you can, to assess your situation. What's really going on? How about you, Eryn?
I like how you distilled all of that into one. That is very helpful. I think this goes back to a concept I learned. I feel like I learned in high school in bits and college in bits, and then with Kyla Mitsunaga, this is one of the exercises she did too at her retreat. But really doing maybe some worst case scenarios. So what's the worst thing that would happen if I asked for help? And then bring that down to another question, asking the same question to where you get to like the deepest part of you that sees and understands the resistance in asking for help. And then you will have more answers on how to move forward.
Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm LaShawn with Mayshell's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.